That evening, Elena retreated to her assigned quarters in the diplomatic wing. The room adapted to her presence, walls shifting to mimic Earth standard dimensions after scanning her biometrics. A garden of bioluminescent plants cast soft blue light across surfaces that seemed to hover without support. Ambassador Log, Earth date September 17, 2187. She spoke to her personal recorder. First impressions of the Confederation Council are concerning. Elena pulled up holographic displays containing the day's proceedings. She studied the Vorjan delegates, their rigid posture, the precise timing of their formal objections, the way their four-fingered hands performed ritual gestures, while their secondary appendages remained suspiciously still beneath their ornate robes. "They're using the Council's protocols against itself," she muttered. "Every formal objection buys them time. Every request for historical precedent delays action, and the Confederation representatives don't seem to realize they're being played." A soft chime announced a visitor. When the entrance dissolved into an archway, Elena was surprised to see a junior representative from the Alteran delegation, a species resembling Earth cephalopods whose homeworld orbited a distant red dwarf. "Forgive the intrusion, Ambassador Reyes," the Alteran's translator rendered in precise English. "I am Underdelegate Nimia. My superior sent me to offer traditional welcome gifts." The young Alteran placed a crystalline orb on the table between them. Once settled, it projected a star chart showing Confederation territory. "This is most generous." Elena began with the formal response she'd memorized. "The map is not the gift," Nimia interrupted, tentacles shifting in what Elena would later learn indicated nervousness. "The Alteran delegation wishes you to know that several representatives found your observations during today's council session intriguing." Elena raised an eyebrow. "I didn't speak during the session." "Your micro-expressions did," Nimia replied. "Several species here can detect heart rate fluctuations, pheromone shifts, and pupil dilation. You recognize something about the Vorjan strategy that our senior representatives missed." Elena studied the young diplomat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because 3 of our worlds share borders with recently annexed territories." Nimia's skin rippled with subtle color changes. "And because our historical archives contain concerning parallels. The last species that employed tactics similar to the Vorjans eventually conquered 17 systems before being stopped." Elena leaned forward. "What happened to them?" "They became the Vorjans," Nimia said simply. "Their empire has been expanding in cycles for millennia, each time with a new name and claimed identity. But the pattern remains consistent." As the Alteran departed, Elena turned back to the star chart with fresh understanding. She wasn't just Earth's first diplomat to an advanced galactic community. She might be the only representative who could recognize a predator's strategy before it was too late. Elena followed Elder Tholax through a hidden passage behind the reception hall, the ancient being's translucent form gliding silently ahead. They emerged onto a suspended observation platform overlooking the Confederation hub's central atrium, where representatives from 17 species mingled in carefully choreographed social rituals. "You must understand, Ambassador Reyes," Tholax said, voice like rustling leaves. "Your response to Supreme Delegate Krav violated 8 separate diplomatic protocols. By Confederation standards, you committed a serious transgression." Elena leaned against the crystalline railing. "And yet you're speaking with me privately instead of supporting my formal censure." The elder's skin lights pulsed in a pattern Elena couldn't interpret. "I have lived through 16 Confederation epochs. I have witnessed the admission of 11 species and the withdrawal of 3. In all that time, I have never seen anyone respond to Vorjan provocation with laughter. On Earth, sometimes humor is the only sane response to absurdity," Elena replied, watching the gathering below. "Krav wanted me to respond with either aggression or submission. Both would have reinforced his narrative about humanity." Indeed, Thalax's translator rendered the complex harmonic tones. "Most fascinating is how your response affected Krav's biochemical patterns. His secretion of dominance pheromones ceased immediately. For 3.7 seconds, he experienced complete neural confusion. Elena smiled. We call that being caught off guard on Earth. The Vorgians have expanded their influence within the Confederation for 3 centuries through predictable methods, Thalax continued. They provoke, then exploit the resulting protocol violations to demand concessions. Their strategy depends entirely on anticipating reactions. Below them, the reception continued, species segregating into traditional conversational groupings based on ancient alliance structures. Only the Vorgian representatives moved freely between groups, their towering forms commanding attention. Your species has an unusual history, Thalax said, appendages manipulating a small device that created a privacy field around them. Most achieve interstellar capability after unifying their planet. Yours remains fractured into competitive nation-states even as you reach beyond your system. We find strength in diversity, Elena replied. Different approaches, competing ideas. They drive innovation. Perhaps. Thalax's skin lights shifted to deeper hues. This explains why the Vorgian prediction models failed with you. Their algorithms analyzed 1,000-year cultural patterns to anticipate diplomatic responses. Humanity's rapidly evolving culture defies such prediction. Elena considered this. You're suggesting my unpredictability is an advantage. I am suggesting, Thalax replied carefully, that after 10,000 years of stability, the Confederation has become a system that values order above adaptation. The Vorgians exploit this weakness methodically, annexing territories too small to trigger defensive protocols while we debate appropriate responses. Where I come from, Elena said, predators also target the weak and isolated first. They count on the herd not responding until it's too late. Thalax's translator remained silent for several moments before finally rendering. Then perhaps the Confederation requires something it has long considered obsolete, a disruption to its perfect harmony. Your proposal is unprecedented, Elder Thalax said, examining Elena's strategic simulation hovering between them. The holographic display showed resource flows throughout Confederation territories, with Vorgian positions marked in pulsing red. Elena's small team had gathered in a forgotten maintenance sector of the hub. Under-delegate Nimia represented the Alterans, while 2 other species, the Crystalline Terraxians and the Gaseous Veil Collective, had sent junior representatives. All had border systems vulnerable to Vorgian expansion. Unprecedented is exactly what we need, Elena replied, manipulating the display to highlight the Lyrian Nebula. The Vorgians analyze historical responses to predict countermoves. Every time the Confederation follows established protocols, they're 3 steps ahead. The Veil Representative, a swirling cloud of iridescent particles contained in a mobility field, shifted anxiously. The Council rejected your warning. To act without consensus violates our most sacred principles, which is precisely why the Vorgians will never expect it, Elena pointed out. They're counting on the Confederation to debate while they secure the nebula. A small team operating outside normal parameters will catch them completely unprepared. Ninia's tentacles rippled with anxiety. What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador? Elena expanded the nebula section of the display. The Vorgians will establish command nodes at these coordinates, first to secure communications. Their neural interfaces are particularly sensitive to pattern disruption. I propose we introduce an element their systems cannot easily filter. What element? The Crystalline Terraxian asked, light refracting through its faceted form. Elena smiled. Human music. She activated an audio file, filling the chamber with the improvisational complexity of John Coltrane's Giant Steps. The Confederation representatives recoiled at the seemingly chaotic patterns. This is disturbing, Ninia said, tentacles curling protectively. Exactly, Elena nodded. Your species evolved toward mathematical harmony. The Vorgians developed along similar lines, but militarized. Their neural interfaces process information through rigid algorithmic patterns. They're even more vulnerable to disruption than you are. Elder Thalax moved closer to the display, skin lights pulsing thoughtfully. You believe this auditory chaos would disrupt their command structure. Not just disrupt, paralyze, Alina explained. Their ship's systems are designed to filter predictable interference. This isn't random noise. It's human improvisation, organized chaos following rules they can't quickly analyze. The Veil representative swirled more rapidly. A fascinating hypothesis, but how would we deploy this without council authorization? We have no military vessels. Alina's smile widened. We don't need warships. My diplomatic shuttle has communication systems capable of broadcasting on multiple frequencies. The Confederation grants ambassadors broad discretion in cultural exchange activities. Cultural exchange. Nimia's translator rendered her surprise. Technically, Alina said with a glint in her eye, I'd just be sharing Earth music with our Vorjan neighbors. No diplomatic protocols prohibit artistic expression, correct? Elder Thalax's skin lights shifted to a hue Alina had never seen before. The translator hesitated before rendering. You propose to defend the Confederation through a loophole. Humanity has a long history of finding creative solutions within established rules, Alina replied. Sometimes the most effective defense isn't a shield or a weapon, but simply playing a different game than your opponent expects. Alina's diplomatic shuttle drifted silently through the outer reaches of the Lyrian Nebula, its energy signature masked by the natural quantum fluctuations that made the region so valuable. The vessel's diplomatic markings remained clearly visible, a calculated risk that balanced deniability with the protection its status provided. Vorjan command ships entering Vector 4, Nimia reported from the sensor station, tentacles moving with unexpected precision across the alien interface. Their formation indicates standard resource securing protocol. Estimate 8 minutes until they establish primary command nodes. Alina nodded, making final adjustments to the broadcasting array. The modified communication system had been disguised as a cultural exchange module, technically accurate, if one stretched diplomatic definitions to their breaking point. Elder Thalax, are you monitoring Confederation channels? Alina asked, glancing at the ancient being whose translucent form seemed to shimmer with tension. Yes, Ambassador. The Council remains in session, debating whether to send observers to the nebula. At current pace, they will reach consensus approximately 14 hours after the Vorjans have secured complete control. Alina couldn't suppress a smile. Then we're right on schedule. She activated the final sequence, loading the carefully selected musical compositions into the broadcast buffer. The system displayed waveform patterns of astonishing complexity, the improvisational genius of humanity's greatest jazz artists rendered as visual mathematics. I still don't understand how this will affect their neural systems, the Tyraxian representative said, crystalline structure vibrating with doubt. The Vorjans have military-grade filtering algorithms. Their filters are designed for known patterns, Alina explained, fingers dancing across the interface. Filtering works by recognizing and removing expected interference, but human jazz follows rules that aren't immediately apparent. It creates patterns that seem random but contain hidden structure. Their systems will attempt to analyze rather than block it, creating cascading processing demands. The shuttle's proximity alerts flashed as Vorjan vessels entered optimal range. Now, Alina said simply, activating the broadcast. The nebula's unique properties amplified the transmission, carrying Coltrane's saxophone improvisations across all Vorjan communication frequencies. On the tactical display, the neat formation of enemy ships began to waver. Their command channels are experiencing significant disruption, Nimia reported, amazement evident despite the translator's neutral tones. Secondary systems attempting to compensate, now experiencing similar effects. The Vorjan fleet's disciplined approach dissolved into disarray. Several smaller vessels began drifting off course as their navigation systems struggled with contradictory commands. Two larger ships nearly collided before emergency protocols forced them into separate trajectories. How long will this effect last? Thalax asked, watching the chaos with skin lights pulsing rapidly. Not long enough for permanent damage, Alina replied, already piloting the shuttle away. but long enough to demonstrate their vulnerability, and to capture evidence for the Council. As they accelerated from the nebula, the Veil representative's particle cloud formed what Alina would later learn was their expression of astonishment. The Vorsians are broadcasting on emergency channels. The Veil translated. They're reporting an unknown weapon of unprecedented neural interference. They're requesting immediate strategic withdrawal to assess defensive countermeasures. Alina allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as she set course back to the Confederation hub. In human military history, we learned something important. Sometimes the most effective victory isn't destroying your opponent. It's changing their risk assessment. Alina stood before her expanded team in the repurposed maintenance chamber, now transformed into an impromptu strategic center. What had begun as 5 cautious allies had grown to representatives from 11 species, each bringing unique capabilities to her unorthodox initiative. The Lyrian Nebula operation exceeded expectations, she explained, gesturing to the galactic display where Vorsian fleet movements showed clear disruption patterns. But they're already developing countermeasures against sonic interference. We need to escalate beyond their adaptation capabilities. The Meraxi representative, a being composed of interlocking geometric shapes that constantly rearrange themselves, shifted forward. The Council has noticed unauthorized activities. Several elder representatives have expressed concerns about disharmonious methods, which is why our next phase must appear completely benign, Alina replied. The Vorsians expect military countermoves. Instead, we'll deploy something far more difficult to defend against: ideas. She activated a new display showing hundreds of data packets prepared for distribution. Earth culture contains concepts the Vorsian Empire has systematically eliminated from their controlled populations: individual choice, creative expression, collaborative decision-making. You propose to transmit philosophy? Asked the Taraxian, facets glinting with skepticism. Not just philosophy, Alina corrected, but stories, music, art, packaged as entertainment and educational materials. We'll distribute them through official cultural exchange channels to recently annexed territories. Under Delegate Nimia's tentacles curled thoughtfully. The Vorsians cannot object without violating Confederation exchange protocols they themselves have exploited for centuries. Precisely, Alina smiled. And once these ideas take root, the Vorsian control systems will face a challenge their algorithms cannot easily counter: populations that no longer behave according to prediction models. Elder Thilax, who had remained silent, finally spoke. You are describing a form of mimetic warfare, introducing thought patterns that replicate and spread autonomously. On Earth, we learned that oppressive systems are most vulnerable to ideas that resonate with universal desires, Alina explained. Freedom of expression, self-determination, community based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. The Veil representative's particle cloud condensed with concern. The Vorsians will recognize this strategy eventually, by which time the ideas will have spread beyond their ability to contain, Alina countered. Their standard response, increased suppression, will only accelerate adoption by confirming the message's relevance. She highlighted specific data packets containing Earth music, literature, and philosophical concepts. Each cultural element has been selected for maximum resonance with the psychological profiles of subjugated species. The delivery systems appear as standard entertainment modules, but contain embedded concepts that neurological research suggests are universally compelling. The Meraxi's geometric components rearranged into what Alina had come to recognize as their expression of amusement. You are weaponizing Shakespeare and Beethoven, along with democracy, jazz improvisation, and collaborative problem-solving, Alina confirmed. The Vorsians built their empire on predictability and control. We'll introduce the one thing their systems cannot easily manage: the human capacity for creative deviation from expected patterns. As her allies began coordinating distribution channels, Alina studied the galactic map with quiet satisfaction. The Nebula operation had been a tactical victory, But this was strategic warfare at its most elegant. Not conquering territory, but liberating minds. The council chamber had never felt so tense. Alina could almost see the currents of diplomatic anxiety flowing between representatives as Supreme Delegate Krav's ultimatum hung in the air. His massive holographic presence dominated the center of the chamber, armor bristling with new battle insignia that told their own story of escalation. The Confederation has 24 standard cycles to surrender the human diplomat. Krav's translated voice resonated through the chamber. After which, we will consider all defensive agreements nullified. As the transmission ended, pandemonium erupted, a shocking breach of decorum in a chamber where disagreements had been expressed through subtle gesture and formal protocol for millennia. The Harmonic Council Elder rose from the central dais, appendages extended in the ritual gesture requesting silence. Gradually, the chamber quieted. "These are unprecedented circumstances," the Elder began. "We must consider all perspectives before reaching consensus." Alina watched as representatives formed into traditional alliance clusters, their discussions just beyond translator range. The mathematics of survival was being calculated across the chamber. Billions of lives weighed against trillions. "Ambassador Reyes," the Elder continued, "the accusations against you are severe. The Vorjan Empire claimed you have violated sovereignty protocols and interfered in their internal governance. How do you respond?" Alina rose slowly, feeling the weight of attention from species whose evolutionary paths diverged from humanity's hundreds of millions of years ago. She walked to the speaker's position with deliberate calm. "Esteemed representatives," she began, "I stand before you as Earth's voice, but also as someone who sees patterns you have forgotten how to recognize." She activated her data pad, projecting a time-lapse visualization showing Vorjan territorial expansion over 3 centuries, a slow, methodical consumption of systems too small to trigger Confederation defensive protocols. "For 10,000 years, the Confederation has refined harmony into an art form," she continued. "You've created a marvel of cooperation unprecedented in known galactic history. But in perfecting consensus, you developed a blind spot that the Vorjan Empire has exploited systematically." Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the visualization highlighted the mathematical precision of Vorjan expansion, each annexation calculated to remain just below intervention thresholds. "The Vorjans don't seek your harmony," Alina's voice strengthened. "They seek dominance masked as participation. They've studied your protocols not to join your community but to exploit its vulnerabilities." Supreme Counselor Zhen of the Meraxi Collective, whose geometric form had shifted to sharp angles indicating distress, spoke from his position. "Even if your analysis is correct, Ambassador, we cannot abandon 10 millennia of peaceful principles. The Confederation cannot become what it has long rejected." Alina nodded respectfully. "I'm not suggesting you abandon harmony. I'm proposing you expand your definition of it." She manipulated her display to show Earth's musical notation. In human music, harmony isn't the absence of different notes. It's their deliberate combination to create something greater than any single sound. True harmony incorporates dissonance within a larger pattern. The chamber fell silent as her words were processed through hundreds of translators. "The Vorjans fear humanity not because we're violent," Alina concluded, meeting the gaze of representatives one by one, "but because we demonstrate that difference and disagreement can strengthen rather than weaken civilization. A harmony that cannot incorporate new voices isn't harmony at all. It's stagnation waiting to be exploited." Alina watched the Earth broadcast from her diplomatic quarters, surrounded by representatives from her expanded coalition. On screens across the galaxy, billions witnessed something unprecedented: direct, unfiltered dialogue between opposing perspectives. Supreme Delegate Krav's image occupied one half of the split screen, his battle armor deliberately imposing. Alina had chosen a simple blue diplomatic uniform for her side, a stark visual contrast that communicated volumes before either spoke. "This is a remarkable approach, Ambassador," Elder Thalax observed, skin lights pulsing with what Alina had learned to recognize as cautious optimism. No species has ever invited such public confrontation with the Vorjan Empire. Confrontation isn't the goal, Elena replied as technicians finalized the connection. Transformation is. The broadcast began with formal introductions, but Krav immediately attempted to establish dominance through ritual Vorjan declarations of grievance. Elena allowed him to complete the expected protocol before responding. "Supreme Delegate, your concerns are noted," she said simply. "Now perhaps we might discuss the actual issues rather than procedural formalities." The translator rendered Krav's momentary silence perfectly, his neural patterns clearly disrupted by her deviation from expected diplomatic sequencing. "There are no issues to discuss," he finally responded. "The Vorjan Empire has exercised legitimate authority over its expansion zones. Your interference constitutes violation of sovereignty principles recognized by the Confederation for millennia." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Let's examine that principle. The Confederation recognizes sovereignty over territories, where governing entities maintain stable administrative control accepted by resident populations." She activated a display showing real-time data from recently annexed systems. These metrics show increasing civil disruption across 17 Vorjan-controlled worlds. Either your control is not stable, or it's not accepted, possibly both. Krav's secondary appendages twitched with suppressed agitation. Temporary adjustment difficulties. The disruption patterns match known insurgent tactics employed by human operatives. "Interesting theory," Elena replied evenly. "Though the pattern more closely resembles organic cultural evolution when populations encounter new concepts. The spread rates follow mathematical models of idea transmission, not military disruption." The broadcast's real-time metrics showed viewership expanding exponentially across Confederation and Vorjan territories alike. Populations historically disengaged from diplomatic proceedings were witnessing something they'd never seen: authentic dialogue where representatives spoke directly rather than through ritual exchange. "Your species doesn't understand galactic stability," Krav declared, switching to a prepared argument. "The Vorjan approach provides structure necessary for interstellar civilization. Our methods have refined over 30,000 years. Perhaps that's why they're failing now," Elena suggested. "Methods refined in past conditions struggle when environments change. Humans have survived by adapting rapidly to new challenges rather than perfecting responses to old ones." From her quarters, Nimia monitored communication patterns across annexed territories. "Ambassador, something extraordinary is happening. Public gathering spaces throughout Vorjan systems are filled with citizens watching this transmission. Local authorities appear unsure how to respond to unauthorized assemblies that technically violate no regulations." Elena suppressed a smile. The dialogue itself wasn't the strategy, it was merely the catalyst. The real transformation was happening in millions of minds witnessing a form of exchange they'd never experienced: open, direct, and unconstrained by rigid protocols. "The Vorjan Empire provides order," Krav continued, falling back on standard ideological assertions. "While humanity offers something different," Elena countered. "The possibility that order without choice isn't order at all. It's simply control." Elena stood at the observation window of her diplomatic office, watching ships from 3 newly admitted species dock at the Confederation hub. Just 6 standard cycles after Delegate First-Rank Torvax had replaced Krav, the galactic landscape had shifted in ways no prediction algorithm could have anticipated. A soft chime announced Elder Thalax's arrival. The ancient being's translucent form seemed brighter somehow, the internal light patterns more vibrant than when they had first met. "The Council of Alternative Perspectives has approved your proposed framework," Thalax said without preamble. "Beginning next cycle, each member species will contribute both consensus representatives and designated contrary analysts to all policy discussions." Elena smiled. "Institutionalized devil's advocates. Humanity has found value in that approach for centuries." A crude but accurate description. Thalax's translator rendered with what Elena now recognized as dry humor. The concept faced significant resistance until the mathematical models demonstrated a 47% improvement in threat identification when incorporating deliberate counter-perspectives. They moved to the conference area where holographic displays showed real-time data from formerly Vorgen-controlled territories. Systems that had experienced rigid uniformity for centuries now displayed remarkable diversity in governance approaches, each evolving unique hybrid models combining local traditions with newly introduced concepts. The most fascinating outcome, Thalax observed, manipulating the display to highlight population satisfaction metrics, is how quickly these worlds are establishing stability despite, or perhaps because of, their embrace of internal diversity. It's something we learned on Earth through painful experience, Alina replied. Systems that suppress difference eventually collapse under their own rigidity. Those that channel disagreement into constructive adaptation tend to survive longer. A notification flashed on Alina's diplomatic console, a transmission from the Vorgen transitional government. She accepted with a gesture, and Torvax's image appeared, his battle armor now modified with symbols that marked him as part of the Reform faction. Ambassador Reyes, the Vorgen began without ritual preamble, itself a notable change. Our governing council requests consultation on implementing what your records call democratic transition protocols. Our specialists have reviewed Earth historical data but recommend direct advisory support. After arranging a formal delegation, Alina turned back to Thalax as the transmission ended. They're learning faster than I expected. Necessity accelerates adaptation, Thalax replied. Internal reports suggest 17 major population centers refused standard resource distribution until participation reforms were implemented. The Vorgens discovered what you humans apparently knew instinctively, that control systems require more energy than collaborative ones. Together they moved to the great ceremonial hall where representatives from 30 species now gathered regularly. The traditional seating arrangement, once rigidly hierarchical, based on admission longevity, had been replaced by a fluid configuration that rotated regularly. The Confederation existed for 10 millennia before humanity arrived. Thalax observed, skin lights pulsing with complex emotions, the translator rendered as philosophical amusement. We achieved wonders of cooperation, technological marvels, and cultural refinement beyond anything in recorded galactic history. But, Alina prompted, sensing the unspoken qualification. But perhaps we had begun to fossilize, the elder admitted. Perfect harmony maintained too long becomes static, beautiful but fragile. The Vorgen threat might have eventually overwhelmed us had we not encountered a species that remembered something we had forgotten. Which is? Alina asked. That true harmony isn't the absence of difference, Thalax replied, gesturing toward the diverse gathering. It's the dynamic integration of it.